New videos every day.
Alright, so I want to talk for a second about this idea of destiny. Do you have a destiny, right? People have been trying to figure out people's destiny or predict their behavior or answer the question of why does somebody act the way that they act since the dawn of recorded history. Now, one of the oldest ideas is that your lot in life or your destiny is determined by karma, which is what you've done in the past, kind of thing. Of course, the Hindus have this all wound up in the idea of reincarnation, and if you're suffering in this life, it's because you caused suffering in a prior life. But that's one of the older ideas. Okay, after karma, you get this idea of, your destiny is determined by the stars. You have the subject of magic, and specifically there's something called hermetical magic, where they have this idea that as it is above, so is it below. Your destiny is written in the stars. And of course, we're talking about astrology here, right? But a lot of different cultures have had some form of astrology. The Mayans, the Arabs, the Babylonians. It's an old idea, and it continues to be an idea even today. We still have horoscopes and people that practice astrology, even though the majority of people consider it a pseudoscience, right? Now, another idea or way to predict people's behavior or understand why people do the things they do was tea leaves. The Chinese would put little leaves of tea in a cup and look at it and try to tell, why somebody was the way they were or what their future was. The Greeks and the Romans would do this thing where they would cut open a bird and look at its guts, and they would try to predict what was going to happen based on the way the guts in the bird were. So people have been trying to predict destiny for a long, long time. A long time ago, the Greeks had this idea that, maybe what's wrong with people or maybe destiny is determined by physiology. And as I said in an earlier video, they got this idea of hysteria being a disease of the wandering womb, or we have the word lunatic, somebody's insane because of the moon, which is pretty much as it is above, so is it below. It's an astronomy kind of concept, right? And then you also had this concept a long time ago, especially like in Hindu and Chinese cultures, of your destiny is determined by your bloodline. Who's your mommy, who's your daddy, who's your grandpa and your grandma, and that's going to determine stuff about you. Now that idea has, gone straight into the 20th century, into the early eugenics movements of, the early 1900s, and still continues today in genetics to a large degree, right? Now, for a second, let's kind of relate this to mental illness. Like I said before, people, thought that, well, maybe people were mentally ill because of the womb, or maybe people were mentally ill because of, actually the Greeks had this idea that you had these different fluids in the body that are called humors, and they actually thought that if your humors got out of balance, it would cause illness and could potentially cause mental illness. Now, this is 2,000 years ago, and how similar does that sound to the chemical imbalance in the brain thing, right? So, we continually see these ideas, travel through time kind of thing. Now, in the late 1800s, mid 1800s, people came up with this idea called phrenology. You could predict somebody's behavior or predict their future by looking on the bumps in their head. Now, past that, they got into this thing called body typing. And I mentioned in another video, I have a book by Columbia University, published in 1950 by their Department of Psychiatry, showing how to tell if somebody's mentally ill or not by the shape of their body, just 50 years ago. Now, in the 80s, there was this huge wave of You know, maybe people are schizophrenic because there's a schizophrenia gene, or maybe people are gay because there's a gay gene, or maybe people are violent because there's a violent gene, or maybe people have a high IQ because there's a high IQ gene. And they did all these genetic studies to try to find these genes and, you know, determine if somebody was violent or schizophrenic or whatever. Well, every one of these single gene studies has utterly, completely, 100% failed. There's no gay gene, there's no schizophrenia gene, there's no violence gene. You know, it's just not there. You know, scientists are finally just now giving up on that single gene idea. You know, now they say everything's multifactorial and it's a complex interaction of genes, and so complex we don't know what that complex interaction of genes are, right? So over time, society has let go of this idea of astronomy. They've let go of the idea of tea leaves. They've let go of the idea of phrenology, or your future being determined by your body type. And they've let go of the idea that it's a single gene kind of thing. And now they say, well, it's multiple genes. So genetics is really the new form of determinism. Genetics is really the new, it's as written, instead of saying as it is written in the heavens, so is it on the earth, they say as it is written in your DNA, so is it, right? Well, every single method or every attempt to predict destiny, to explain destiny, has failed. The tea leaves failed, the astronomy failed, the body typing failed, right? And here we are looking at the DNA. And I can't help but wonder, is the DNA going to fail too? And personally, philosophically, I think it is. Personally, I believe in free will. I think people actually have a choice. I think the majority of behaviors are based on learning and decision. It's this, what I'm talking about is this radical idea called behavioralism that, a B.F. Skinner came up with in the early 1900s, But I think it'll fail. I think what we are doing now, looking at the genome, looking at all these different genetic sequences and trying to explain things like schizophrenia or homosexuality or intelligence or, whatever, is just tea leaves. It failed in astronomy, it failed in tea leaves, it failed in the organs and the bodies of birds and sacrificial animals. It has just failed. So you gotta wonder, is your future really written in your genes, or do you really control your future?